Hello everyone, my name's Phawx. This is the AYANEO 2. Thank you very much to the AYANEO team for sending this out to me for review. It's exciting times because this is yet another handheld that is using AMD's Rembrandt platform, the 6800U, with the 680M GPU. This is really what's going to give us all that power that we need to start pushing forward ahead in games. Things that we've been waiting for a long time. Pretty much every one of my subscribers who has been here, everyone that subscribes to me is a part of the hardcore. This is not news to us. We've been doing this for a long time. So this is the first entry of handhelds outside of Valve SteamDeck where we're starting to get a good amount of power where we can actually start doing things like playing games without needing to do a bunch of tweaks. So for every one of my subscribers, the day is finally here. A bunch of handhelds are starting to come out 1600U. This review is on the AYANEO 2. I'm a big fan of it. We're going to go through all of it. Let's talk about what this video is about. Up first, we're going to start talking about the build quality, all the design considerations that the AYA team put forward, like the all-glass front. There is a geek version of it, which, to be honest, I am a big fan of. They have slightly offset D-pad and analog sticks on the bottom row, which to me I think is going to be actually quite large in terms of comfort. But this review is only going to be talking about the AYANEO 2. I don't have the geek model, so I really can't speak much to it. But overall, the build quality of it, all the design considerations that they did, really just trying not to show screws in the back. We're going to touch base on that. But the D-pad, even though it's membrane-based, is actually pretty good. This is a first for me from the AYANEO team. They made a D-pad that I actually like. The analog stick is absolutely fantastic. There's probably one little part that I would like to be a bit better. We'll touch base more on that later. We're going to talk about the AYASpace app. That continues to improve and iterate. When that first came out, I wasn't a big fan, but it's now a critical part of the AYANEO experience that I would think I'd be lost without it at this point. It does a bunch of things that are necessary for a device that does not have any hardware keyboard or hardware mouse or any type of mouse control to emulate on the analog sticks outside of software, that it's really becoming dependent that you need this AYASpace app. So I'm glad that they continue to iterate on that. We'll touch more base on that more in a second. Additionally, I'm going to talk about battery life, and we're going to kind of focus that on where the AYASpace app itself kind of wants to dictate where TDP is. I will also talk about TDP at its absolute apex, which is 33 watt. And then we're also going to talk about thermals, like how does that work thermally? Like, can the internal heatsink fan support 33 watt? Can it feel good in your hands when you're pushing that much power in for a long period of time? So I did a 1 hour burn-in test at 33 watt, and I got some thermal scans so we can take a look at that, and we'll see where all of the heat radiates outward to the exterior plastic shell. I do have some benchmarks against the SteamDeck, but it's only going to be a small subset of benchmarks because I'm going to be doing another video that is going to be SteamDeck versus the AYANEO 2 in a more complete separate video. And then we're going to wrap it up with the pros and cons that I found on the AYANEO 2 to complete this review. All right, let's talk about the build quality of the AYANEO 2. And there are a lot of design considerations that you can really see that the AYANEO team is paying attention to. First up, I'm sure there's going to be like a love-hate relationship with this entire glass front panel that kind of goes across the entire device outside of these strips right here. For what it's worth, I actually really like it. I like the feel of it. I don't think it's to everyone's tastes, but for me, I like it. The only negative here is that I would have preferred this to be offset a little bit, like the Geek model is. If we take a look at like just holding the device, which is super comfortable, the problem is if I'm analog dominant and need to go down to the D-pad, is that I have to put my thumb into a position that's a little bit uncomfortable. Even just having it being offset just a little bit, like instead of my thumb being here to be in the center of the D-pad, if it was just right over here, that it may seem really small, but it's actually a pretty big change. So that's the only thing that I would say starting at face value, just looking at the front of this device. Having said that, I do like the all-glass display. The design considerations, the accents of the AYANEO space button and select and start and how it's all designed really come together, and I actually like how it looks. I'm going to touch base on the D-pad and analog sticks and face buttons later on in the build section of this. Very quickly, the D-pad, I go into detail about why I like it and why I don't like it. The analog stick, this is literally one of the best analog sticks I've ever used on any controller anywhere. The tension feels a bit more tuned and better, and overall the analog stick is super performant, very, very accurate in how it's being pushed. Those Hall-based sensors really just are fantastic. Along the side, you can start to see the whole design consideration where the AYANEO team really wanted no screws to be seen. So you can see this little compartment right here where you would basically open this part up to either reveal screws or some clips to pring out the bottom and then have screws hidden underneath this particular shell. So this is the entryway into the device. I'm not going to be opening up right now. We're going to continue on the bottom. See the downward firing speakers. I wish those were front-facing speakers. Here is the microphone input as well as on the top. However, I've not been able to actually make it work. So even if I go here to listen to the device and I click apply, you can hear there's no feedback whatsoever. And if I go even just taking a look at the mic level here, testing, nothing is here. I tried recording. Unfortunately, nothing's working on that. So I think that might just be another prototype issue. Again, they already mentioned that it's going to be there, so it's most likely just an issue with my particular unit. On the bottom here, they have this nice little flap for the micro SD card. Now, this is a nice, cool little thing. However, again, this unit is a prototype, so there are going to, of course, be issues. You can see that there is a misalignment here. So if I try pushing it in, it doesn't fit that way. And then if I tried flipping it around and pushing in this way, it seems like it goes in, but then it's like stops. And I can't push in anymore. And like you can see that it like bends if I try to push it in. So it's kind of, I unfortunately can't test the micro SD card reader on this particular unit because I can't get the micro SD card in. On the bottom, we have a 3.5mm audio jack, and then we have the other side that is covering either the clips or the screws. Along the top here, we can see our triggers. Now, these triggers they're interesting. I prefer the trigger design of the Xbox Series X, where it's kind of almost contoured a bit. This is a full slope. And it feels nice in the hand, but it almost feels exaggerated. This is kind of nitpicky. It's really good. It's just a nitpicky design thing. It's fine. It really is fine. It has a really large like scoop at the end. It's almost impossible not to be able to use this as a trigger. So again, it's a nitpick of mine. I would prefer a different design. It's just very large. The right bumper is really good. And then they have these included extra buttons here, which are configurable with the AYASpace app. We have 2 additional USB-C ports, which can operate as power. I unfortunately was not able to get eGPU working. It does recognize, and I could get an RTX 3080 installed. However, when starting to be used, it would start to flap. I was, however, able to get 2.6 gigabytes a second of transfer, which is exactly what I got out of the WinMax 2. So for my point, that was fine. It's just that it needs to be stable. Again, this is a prototype. More to the point, the AYA team has already said out loud that they are working on fixing that. On the top here, we have volume buttons, just minus and plus. And then right here, we have our power button and fingerprint sensor. Now, the only thing I would say about that is that it's a bit of a reach. Like if your hand is normal here, like my finger is nowhere near it. So I kind of really just have to reposition my hand to be able to press the fingerprint sensor. And overall, that's kind of the build of it. We can talk about the display itself, which is probably the biggest highlight on the non-geek models, the 1200p version. It really does look sensational in action. Everything about it just kind of just screams out, and it could be the all glass cover here that is really highlighting it, because there is no defining border with glass and plastic. Because it's all glass, it just really just looks sensational on this device. Let's quickly talk about the D-pad here. Taking a brief detour here to talk about the D-pad. Now, the D-pad is a part of the build quality part of this, so we're just going to take a quick moment to kind of just touch base on the D-pad. Now, my particular grading of the D-pad is probably a B+. I don't think it's all that great, but it's not bad, and it is basically my favorite D-pad that AYANEO has made so far. Now, the thing to note here about AYANEO is they continue to make membrane-based D-pads. My preference for dome-based D-pads is that there is less issue with regard to knowing which button you're pressing, because the tactile feedback is very, very apparent. So if I press down here, just like listen, you can hear that there is a qualifying indicator for the user to know that the button that they're pressing down is being pressed down. I don't need to press down hard to know that I'm pressing in that direction. One of the earmarks of a bad membrane-based D-pad. The other part of a membrane-based D-pad is the Achilles heel of them is they typically tend to be pretty bad in the diagonals. Now, I don't know if it's just the concavity of the D-pad and how it slopes, but I found that the diagonals are actually amazingly easy to hit on the AYANEO, and I'm actually having a problem just rolling to get fireballs. So, for instance, if I just lightly kind of just feather and do a rolling motion, I can't guarantee that what I'm looking to do is a fireball. I actually have to press down a bit hard at the finality of it. So if pressing down, no problem. But at the end, I have to like really kind of concentrate and push down for that to actually trigger. If I just like feather it, it's going to work here. But you can see that sometimes without me being very, very concentrating on it, where I have to like push down to make sure that it's going to work. That is my basic only problem with it. So maybe B plus is a bit harsh. I would say an A minus is where this D-pad is. But now check this out. Like doing dragon bunches on this is like easy. Easy. I mean, I could just like seriously just whip these off like a madman. There is, again, it's just the concavity of the D-pad right here where how you can literally feel where you're hitting the diagonal. It's kind of amazing, really. So the D-pad on here, I'm going to bump up the grade on here. I'm going to say it's an A minus D-pad. I've used better D-pads, but I have a preference for dome-based D-pads. If you like membrane-based D-pads, truly, this is really excellent. I think the only thing that I could say is better than this D-pad is an 8BitDo membrane-based D-pad. This is easily the best D-pad that AYANEO team has ever made. So that's pretty much my views on the D-pad, and then obviously the face buttons they're really excellent. These face buttons are crunchy. I love them. It's just, they feel fantastic to roll the thumb over. And then if we take a look at the analog stick here, let's go take a look at a gamepad tester. All right, so let's start testing the analog sticks here now. Now, this is one thing that, for me, it's not a big deal. Oh, let me press the test circularity button. So this is a thing that the AYA team often tries to demonstrate. It is not something that I particularly care about, that the analog sticks make a perfect circle. While that is great, there is going to be zero problems with every direction that you're going to be pressing here. The issue more is that on the SteamDeck and for a lot of other controllers, you would make actually a square box. But this is really just kind of just to demonstrate the precision of what the AYA team is trying to do here. This is a preference that the AYA team likes doing. So if this is something that you like, then it's perfect. Like this is like as engineered perfect as you can possibly get. So really fantastic analog sticks. The only thing that I would say that I would have preferred is that the dead zones weren't as large as they were. So if we can try to get in here a little bit more. All right, so I'm pushing, and there it goes. So it has a bit of a large dead zone. For me, that's not so much of a problem. You can see where it just kind of like pops into existence right there. But the magnetism of the sticks is basically nothing. You can see that if we get in really close, it doesn't really have any particular tendency to want to stick to the cardinal directions. All of the inputs that you're putting in are exceedingly precise because of those Hall-based sensors just being absolutely sensational. Having the dead zone be where it is, it could be a bit smaller for me. Overall, though, like when you're just pressing on the analog stick, the perfect amount of tension all the way through, it's hard to communicate how important having the right amount of tension and finesse on an analog stick because of where you want it. Typically on analog sticks, you're going to be globbing it around and want to do gross movement, and gross not like ew, but gross as in like total. Overall, just a huge fan of these analog sticks. Really well done. That is the end of the build portion of this review. All right, let's take a moment to talk about the AYASpace app. This app, when it first came out, truth be told, I didn't actually like it. I continued using third-party apps just because I didn't find that the AYASpace app was all that there. But because the Aya team continues to make improvements and innovate on it, it is now a thing that I really rely on when using AYANEO devices. Because there is no fundamental switch to make these analog sticks into a mouse, a hardware mouse, you have to rely on the AYASpace app to translate that via software. And it does it really easy. And one of the things that I add myself, if you look right here, I added this right here. So if we take a look around, nothing is happening. But if I just press that, now the mouse will start working. And this makes it very easy to just quickly enable a software emulated mouse via the analog sticks and disable it. And why you'd want to do that is because if you have this enabled and a game is playing, you're actually going to have the mouse moving as well as this. So you want to make sure that you have the mouse cursor on a hotkey that you can quickly swap between it. I have been having issues with this FSR. This is using Magpie in the background, but it hasn't been working for me lately. I had it work once for me on the AYANEO Next, and it hasn't worked since. I use lossless scaler, and I'll show you that as one of the things that's kind of necessary because it is a portrait-based display. So this is something that you're going to ultimately have to use in Windows in general, especially when you want to play older games. It's just going to be necessary to wrap certain things. So going back to the AYASpace app, you can quickly see that there's a bunch of different things that you can kind of just noodle around in here. This optimize button basically will flush the cache of anything that's on the AYASpace app if something is wrong here, and it'll kind of recycle everything, making sure that everything is as good as it can possibly be. Over here, this is the power scheme mode, and it shows a fan here, but leaving on balance, you could also just, kind of push it to the max or battery saving. This is a quick way to rapidly switch Windows power saving modes to kind of dictate. Even though we can set TDP, you can either be conservative or want to just go all out. Here in the TDP section, this is obviously the best part, where you can quickly set between all the different default TDPs that they have here. So in game, it shows 22 watt. Now, the only thing worth mentioning here is that these settings, I found that it will kind of bump itself a little bit further. Like 22 watt will go to 24 watt, 15 watt will go to 17 watt, and power saving will go to 13 watt. Sometimes it'll actually fluctuate, so it'll kind of go wherever you want. And then there's Pro mode. Let me actually go back here. And then you can press Y. You see Y right there? So when you press Y, you can then set whatever TDP you want. Now it goes all the way down to 3 watts, but when looking at this machine, I'm finding that typically when a game is running, it's going to want to pull around 5.5 watts, so it'll go a little bit higher than it can. Right now, I'm just setting it to its absolute max, which is 33 watt, and I've done thermal tests and battery life tests on this particular wattage just to prove that thermally, internal heatsink and fan can handle it, as well as how much battery life you'll get on there. So I've gone ahead and done that as well. Here's where you could quickly switch between different resolutions if you wanted to within the AYASpace app. Over here, you can click Update, and it'll search for an update, and thankfully, they've actually been doing rather frequent updates, and even right now, you can see that there's an update that I can go to. Using the left and right bumper, you can start jumping around to other different parts. We can go to the assistant, and this kind of gives you a bird's eye view of what's going on. Now, the master controller, this doesn't look like it's fully done yet because it's still, last I used it, it was still showing the AYANEO Air, and it's still showing this. So if we just press down, you can see that there's some customization that you can do to the buttons or vibration or enabling the gyro. We're going to go ahead and get out of this. And then if we go to the configure Neo, you can see that this is exactly as it's supposed to be. So in here we can change the RGB of the analog sticks themselves. So you can see that I have default already turned on, or you can just say turn off if you want them off. Also, there is this new feature here that I didn't show before where you can actually set a lights out mode. So if it's late at night and you don't want those to be on and it passes a certain time, it'll automatically turn off at that time. Go ahead and turn these back on. Now right now I only have a few different settings. I think only the white LEDs are working on mine. If I go to blue, nothing changes. If I go to yellow, if I go to red. So right now, the white LED is the only thing that's working on mine. Obviously, when you get your production model, this will change. I'm going to go ahead and turn them off because I don't really care to have them on or off. And then this is to configure these buttons up on top, which is pretty important. So the only thing here that I wish was that you could customize a very particular key. Like on a keyboard, I want this to be F11. right? So pressing F11 typically will maximize the screen or lower it like in emulators and stuff, but you don't really have that option. So if you just press this, it'll bring up the on-screen keyboard. This is really nice, and I'm glad that they added these extra buttons, because extra buttons on a device without a keyboard or mouse is very much wanted. The only thing that I wish was that you could actually specify the keys exactly as you wanted, like F11 or F4. So that's the only thing that I wish was there. Over here is the calibration if you needed to calibrate any of the keys themselves, but all of my keys are working as they should. And then this, you can see that you can go to basically Nintendo style or Xbox style. I'm going to leave it in their Xbox style, which is the default layout here. So that's it for the AYASpace app. All right, let's start taking a look at the battery on the AYANEO 2 and what that means in terms of battery life. So the AYANEO 2 has a 50 watt-hour battery that's around 25% greater in capacity than the SteamDeck. Now, that is great. However, we can use far more power than the SteamDeck can, because we can boost up to around 30 watt TDP, which is going to be close to 45 watt total. So when you're up there, you're going to really kind of minimize your battery life down to about an hour, but that is an extreme TDP. In fact, it's not even available on the Aya Quick tool, so that is something that you would have to manually select in the Pro mode, but thermally the device can take it. And we'll touch base on that in a later section just ahead in this video. Because I would expect a lot of people to be using the AYASpace Aya Quick tool, we're going to kind of focus on what battery life will be inside of these TDPs. At this setting, you're going to be looking at 90 minutes of battery life at best. So if we go down to balance, we're going to go what it says 15 watt, but let's take a look at what it says under the bottom. You can see it's 15 watt there, but I've seen it spike up to 17 watt. Let's see if it respects going at 15 watt. On package power, we can verify that it is, and total system power is around 28 watts. So at 28 watt total power, you're looking at around 107 minutes. Let's just say 110 minutes just to be even here. So at 110 minutes of battery life at 15 watt TDP, that is if the package power stays at 15 watt. If we bump this up to 17 watt, which is what it kind of fluctuates up to, you're going to get a little bit less, maybe down to 100 minutes of battery life. If we go to power savings, this is at 11 watt, and let's take a look at what it actually runs at. So we're running at 11 watt right now. Now this bottom power, this has a little bit of swing to it. It can actually up its package power. We are guaranteed 11 watt right there. So this is probably closer to 20 watt total. You're looking at 2.5 hours of battery life. Now if we go into Pro mode, right? If we go here, let's go down, we'll go in here. Let's see what happens when I choose an arbitrarily low TDP. Let's see 3 watt TDP, right? At 3 watt TDP, let's see what it's actually taking. There we go. So at 5.5 watts, we're looking at 13.5 watt, but typically I've seen this be, when our battery's at 100%, that it would be 12.5 watts. So that is exactly 4 hours of battery life. Even though it says 3 watt right here, that is not the case. It's actually running at close to 6 watt. At 5 watt, we're still... What happens when I push it to 6? When I push it to 6 watt, it wants to run at 8 watts right there. At 8 watt, it's jumping up. This is probably going to be closer to 15 watt total. So you're looking at 3 hours and change at this TDP. So at 8 watt TDP, you're going to be looking at 3 hours. So let's recap here. At 22 watt, you're going to be looking at around 80 to 90 minutes of battery life. At balance, you're going to be looking at 110 to 120 minutes, almost 2 hours. At 11 watt, you're going to be 2.5 hours to 3 hours. And then whatever you're going to be setting, 6 watt, at 6 watt TDP, you're basically going to get 4 hours battery life. And that's only if you're pushing it that far all the time. I'm just saying this is a worst case scenario. You can also see that I'm medium brightness here, and truthfully on this panel, that's more than enough. Okay, so here, this particular graph that you're looking at is temps. So you can see that this is 75 degrees Celsius, and this was starting at 80 degrees Celsius. Up here on our legend, you can see that blue represents the T-die. Now what T-die represents is the hottest spot on any particular part of the chip anywhere. So this blue line represents the absolute hottest part of the chip during this test. Now this is a 30 watt TDP test that I did for 50 minutes. And if we take a look at this entire graph, you can see that the absolute hottest spot that we have here is basically 86 degrees centigrade, which honestly is very good. considering that we're pushing so much power into the package and we're able to handle that heat for such a long time. So this is a really good sign. And then down here is an average of all the cores and stuff. So this is kind of where I tend to take a look at what temps are, because this, with how they leverage all the cores and try to piggyback and ping pong off the different cores, this can be managed a lot more. If this value is very high, this is where things get really bad. And seeing 75, 70, and 80 here, totally manageable. But over here is where I want to kind of just address that even at its absolute hottest on any particular spot on the chip, we're looking at really good temps. So overall, the thermals of the internal on how the internal heatsink fan works is fantastic. Additionally, the thermal properties of the device on the outside are really good as well. All right, so it's been running for 51 minutes so far. If we take a close look up here, we can see that total system power is around 47 watt, when CPU package power is really, I'm going at 32 watt, but right now you're seeing it at 28 watt. So this is where we are. I'm going to go ahead and take some thermal scans of this device, but right now this is kind of running the device as hard as it possibly can for a while. So we're going to take a look at what this looks like thermally right now. On the front of the device, actually nothing is really coming through, and it might be that this glass is not being picked up on my camera, but even when I feel it, there's no real thermal energy being felt on this side. Where all of the thermal energy is radiating outward towards is really from the battery part. If we take a look at the top of the thermal scans, even over here, if we just take a look inside, you can see the heat is, from the fins, but you can't touch it. It's just the exhausting heat that you can be aware of the heat. But along the top, it really doesn't have any feeling whatsoever. And really on the back of the device, when we take a look on the right-hand side, where you would hold it on the right-hand side, this entire area where all the cool air is coming in is doing a good job of taking away all that heat and reducing how much thermal energy is transferred to this plastic exterior case over here. Really where our problem area is, and again highlighted in my thermal scans, is on the left-hand side of the device, where you would hold it with your left hand. Now, right here is where the battery is, and pulling so much power, that total system power from the battery, is causing the battery to heat up. And then that heat is radiating outward to the exterior plastic shell over here, which it does become noticeable to the touch that it is warm over here. Now, it's not that it's hot, it's warm, but it's noticeably warm. The bottom line here is that pushing this device to its absolute max is completely fine, both thermally, internally from the package of standpoint, as well as just holding the device. Because of where you're holding the handles of the device itself, you're not really going to notice that heat all that much when we're pushing it to the absolute maximum. So the only thing that I would say here is that the battery is kind of small for how much power this device can use, so I would really recommend being sure to plug into the device when you do so. Okay, up first we're going to be taking a look at Borderlands 3. Now the settings I'm using is 800p. We are using DirectX 12 as the API backend. Now I am using the high preset, and we're taking a look at average FPS, and that's for every benchmark here. Now the blue legend that you see here, this represents the SteamDeck and SteamOS, and red represents the AYANEO 2. We're running 6800U. I am running Windows 11 22H2, and I have 2210.3 driver set from AMD Radeon. This is going to be similar going through, so let's go ahead and start touching base on what these actually mean. Much like my previous video where I benchmarked the SteamDeck versus 6800U, we're showing the same here, where the SteamDeck just really shines at lower TDPs. And 9 watt, we have a significant lead on the SteamDeck, but at 11 watt is where the 6800U starts actually matching what the SteamDeck is doing, and then 15 watt we overtake it. You are noticing here that there is no blue graph for 18 watt or 28 watt. And the reason for that is that the SteamDeck does not go past 15 watt TDP. So on the AYANEO 6800U, we can. So this is one area where we will start to have exceedingly better performance than what the SteamDeck can. We just have to push more power into the platform. So if we were to take a look at 15 watt, we're at 28 FPS average. If we take a look at the 28 watt, we're looking at a 30% improvement over the SteamDeck in terms of average FPS. So this is really where the 6800U is going to shine. Now, 28 watt, I don't personally recommend while running on battery. If we take a look at the 8 watt TDP, we can see that the difference between 18 watt and 28 watt is only 3 FPS average, yet we're spending 50% more on power to actually achieve that. Is that worth it? That'll be up to you, but I would either advise having an external battery pack handy or being plugged into mains almost at all times. Next up, we're going to take a look at Cyberpunk. Again, we're running at 800p. We are using the SteamDeck preset. However, I am changing the textures to medium, and I changed quality of FSR to auto. And this is one game that the SteamDeck just wins, hands down. The chipset and whatever SteamOS is doing is just really pulling ahead versus Windows here. At 9 watt, it's almost laughably better on the SteamDeck. But at 11 watt, we start to actually wake up the system on 6800U and be somewhat respectable. Only at 15 watt TDP do we actually go over what the SteamDeck does. And then at 18 watt and 28 watt do we actually start really pulling ahead of where the SteamDeck is. And that's where you're going to really start seeing all those improvements over the SteamDeck. So you're going to have the mindset that, number one, if you're going to play Cyberpunk on the AYANEO 2, that you're going to be at 15 watt TDP or above, and you're really going to have to tweak settings a little bit more and have an 800p resolution as a starting ground, maybe upscale to that. And the last benchmark that we're going to look at here, again, I'm going to have a more comprehensive video later on where we're going to be doing SteamDeck versus the AYANEO 2 directly, but this is Horizon Zero Dawn 800p using the Favor Performance preset. At 9 watt, you can see how far ahead the SteamDeck is. We're almost double the frame rate at 9 watt. At 11 watt, SteamDeck is still outperforming. Only at 15 watt do we have that 10% boost over the SteamDeck. So this is the one takeaway that I would like people to have when they are looking at these benchmarks, is that the 6800U does not excel at lower TDPs like the SteamDeck does. It requires at least 13 watts on TDP before we will start to see an advantage over the SteamDeck, and at that point, going forward, it's all gravy going there, but you do have to push more power, and that will challenge battery life. We can still have good battery life compared to the SteamDeck because the AYANEO 2 has a 25% larger capacity battery than the SteamDeck, but then that gets offset by how much more power we're using. So this is just one thing to kind of keep in mind. Alright, so that is my review on the AYANEO 2. Ultimately, when we wrap up here in this conclusion of the video, let's start with the cons first on this particular device. So the cons of the device is that it is a portrait-based screen. So what happens is that if you're going to have any tearing on the screen where you can visibly see tears, they're going to happen this way. So it can be a little jarring. You can obviously fix this with VSync or any other method of frame limiting. You can try to limit how that frame tearing actually occurs, but just be mindful that that's going to happen. The other thing that is to be mindful with this vertical panel, certain games like Red Dead Redemption 2, you're going to have to use some type of upscaling technology to be able to go to full screen if you're going to be using Vulkan. If you don't use Vulkan, you can full screen easier, but if you want to use the Vulkan backend, you're going to need to use some type of image scaler. The other problem that you're going to have with portrait-based displays, on Windows at least, is that you're going to have a problem with playing older games, which you're going to have to wrap, and those are videos that I covered in the past as well. So look for how to fix PC games on my channel, and you'll find that video. That's literally the only con that I have for the device. There are other things that I would like to talk about, but they're not showstoppers because they're a prototype and they're supposed to be fixed later on in the production, which I can't really speak to. I can mention them in this prototype, but they're not really going to be reality for production, but we'll touch base on that in a moment. Let's talk about the pros on this device. The screen is absolutely outrageously fantastic. The analog sticks are fantastic. If I had to nitpick, I would say that I wish that the dead zone was just a little bit smaller, but overall the tension, the feel of them, the material used on top of the analog stick is just fantastic. They're really, really good. When we take a look at the size of the device compared to a SteamDeck, right? Like, you can see that a SteamDeck is considerably larger than this device, yet we have 25% greater capacity on the battery, and when we start pushing power, we can go 25 to 30% better performance. So this starts to make a lot of sense, especially for the cheaper Geek model, which has an 800p display, which, based on the benchmarks I showed you, you can see that there's a value on having just an 800p display. Yeah, it's not going to look as nice as this display, but that's still okay in my book. The 50 watt hour battery, which we just mentioned based on the size comparison of the SteamDeck, 25% larger than in capacity than the SteamDeck. So I'm glad that even though they kept the general size considerations the same as AYANEO stuff did, they pushed the envelope on the battery a little bit more. It is only 3S1P. I wish it was 4S1P, and that's just an internal. That's just my own opinion on that, but there are benefits and cons to doing 4S1P or 3S1P. So them going 3S1P is fine. It's just a thing that I want to mention. The AYASpace app is really good, and they continue to iterate on it. I'm glad that they continue to iterate on it. It makes this device actually usable, so I'm glad that they are focusing on that. The thermals are excellent, both internally with how much heat it can handle. It can run 33 watt at length. You're basically going to be at like 86 degrees Celsius on the max end. Additionally, how much heat transference radiation is happening to the external plastic shell is minimized a lot from the fan. Truthfully, the biggest part of heat that you're going to feel is the heat radiation from the battery from consuming all that power. Again, one of the things from a 3S1P battery is that you're going to put off more heat because each one of those cells has to push out more amps. If you had 4S1P, heat would have been a little bit more manageable. Overall, it's fine. And then obviously the 6800U chipset, I love. It's not great at lower TDPs, but you can still play older games at low TDPs. It's just modern games that are going to require a lot of power to actually get up there. And then the things that are I have to mention, but they're not really cons. They're just kind of things that I have to mention right now. Setting the UMA size in the BIOS would be nice on the AYANEO 2. Right now, if you open up a game, you'll get like a little error saying that there's not enough VRAM in there. Having an option to have the UMA buffer size being 3 gigabytes, I have conceded is a nice starting point because a lot of games will just kind of just not bother you and give you a false warning that there's going to be a problem. The UMA buffer size is dynamic and it'll grow at length, but having that option in the BIOS would be nice to have. Setting at a 3 gigabyte minimum is wise, I think. eGPU support, while it is functionally kind of there, it's not working. The Surface is, well, the hardware flaps, so it will come online, come offline, come online, come offline. So right now it's not absolutely perfect, but it is in a working stage. But the AYANEO team has already addressed that they are working on this. They are saying out loud that it is not working at the moment. So hopefully in the production units that gets fixed, but right now I can report that it's not working on mine, but the AYANEO team is working on it. The sound tap feature that is on the AYANEO 2, I don't have access to that right now. That's another thing in the review notes that we had. That will come later, so I'll have to review sound tap separately in its own video going further. My microSD card doesn't fit, so I can't test any microSD card functionality unless I opened up the entire device and shoved the microSD card in there, which isn't very convenient. So right now I have no means of testing the microSD card, and that is most likely an alignment issue that I'm sure the AYANEO team already knows, so I don't think that's a big issue. Like I wouldn't address that as a con because, again, this is a prototype unit. So that's pretty much it. Those are my pros and cons. My cons being I wish that it was a landscape screen instead of a portrait-based screen. Otherwise, the things that I'm noting are prototype issues that should hopefully be fixed in production. That's it, guys. That is my review on the AYANEO 2. No matter which model you're going to get, I think you're going to have a great time. This is the start of where handheld PC gaming is really going to start really just taking off. I'm excited. Next year is going to be even more exciting. It's a good time to be into PC gaming handhelds. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.